but your corn come out down here in your bucket, and the cob flew out, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that was much simpler.
Did you do anything with the cobs?
Use them for toilet paper. That's my cat to keep things out of the garden.
Does it work? The cat?
So far, it's done a lot better this year. And I had one hill of potatoes, and I've got another one right over there that's coming up. You can see it. I just planted.
I see it.
I planted the potato eyes there real late. This one was a volunteer hill, but it will make potatoes.
This is a really nice garden bed.
I'd say
Yeah, who made this garden bed?
my grandson.
Your favorite grandson, would you say?
One of my favorite grandsons. That's the way Rhonda puts it. One of my
Who, Uncle Danny?
That's messed up. I'm the favorite grandson. Don't you know?
Old sawdust from the sawmill. Now that made good dirt in there.
Just the leftover sawdust at the sawmill?
They've been there for years.
Yeah.
And they brought the mulch. I don't know, 5 or 6 buckets of mulch I put in there. And then the rest of the
How often
dirt,
do you add to it? Did you add to it this year?
Yeah,
Every year you add to it?
I have so far. That's the way I hoe it. I plant it, and then when it needs hoeing, see I've got more dirt right over there. I just take that.
You just
dirt
cover it up?
around.
Cover up the weeds?
No, actually I pull the weeds, but I've got some over there and right up there that I've not pulled.
A lot of people now are thinking about growing their own foods with the
Over
coronavirus shortage and food shortages and
You
things.
know, it's not really a food shortage. They couldn't get it between, as they say, the line was broke. They couldn't get it
Yeah.
in between. But
One kink in the chain, one
Yeah.
break in the chain.
But people's gonna have to grow their own, I'm afraid.
You think so?
Yeah.
Well, when you grew up, Granny, you guys grew the food that you ate,
Oh yeah.
right? Most of the food that you ate, you
Oh,
grew.
man, you had to.
But how big of a garden are we talking to grow the food that you needed? How many brothers and sisters did you have?
I had 8 brothers and 2 sisters.
8 brothers, 2 sisters, plus your parents.
Yeah.
And how big of a garden did it take to feed that?
We had
Just
gardens.
guess.
We had gardens a lot bigger than this area right here.
What, down to the to that shed?
Yeah, it divided in 2 parts. You know, down the back where Mommy's house sits, all the way down to the woods. Well, actually, they brought it up. It's shorter now than it used to be. All of that was just the garden.
Yeah.
Then we had a garden on out towards Zoll was another garden.
You're talking about just like a vegetable garden,
Yeah, I mean that was
like an acre.
earlier. It was their potatoes,
Yeah.
and of course we had. Now we did hardly ever put beans in that garden, but Lord, we raised fields of beans.
Yeah. Just
Round-
for you, or did you sell any of them?
No, we raised them for us. Of course, we give them, some to the families.
Yeah.
And the hardest picking beans that we ever had was around there from, where we went around to the pond.
Mm-hmm.
Now there was a big bean field on down past that. There was Hastings. I remember that white Hastings, and they grew so thick. So you didn't stake your beans or nothing then. Well, you had fields full, you couldn't. And picking them in hot weather.
That wasn't fun?
And then we had to carry them to the house.
Yeah.
Well, there wasn't no road around through there then. You had to come around the Lespedeza field down in the holler and back up to the house. you
Yeah.
know. And yeah.
Just for some beans.
Well,
Did you eat beans pretty much every day?
When you can 500 and 600 cans, that's what it took.
That's a lot.
Then you dried a porch full of hanging on strings.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, we've done
So
this
you
every
canned
year.
a bunch of them, you dried a bunch of them.
Oh, yeah.
Why do one or the other?
Well, it was easier to dry them than it was to can them. You'd run out of cans.
But why not just dry them all?
No, you wanted some canned, and then you couldn't have dried that many. You wouldn't have nowhere to put them, because we'd even dry them on top of the roof,
okay.
the porch roof. We put our beans up there.
For just
apples.
ease of storage, canning them made more sense. And they keep probably longer. Well, no, I guess drying them would keep a long time
Well,
too, right?
one would keep that as long as the other,
Yeah.
but dried beans don't taste like
Canned beans.
fresh canned beans.
Yeah.
Because they're what you call the shucky beans.
Shucky beans. That's right.
You pick them.
Pick them.
You string them.
String them.
Then
What,
you,
run a thread, needle
you
through
take a
them?
needle and thread and you thread them up. Well, sometimes you'd have a double to hang up from the porch up as high as you could hang on, and they could be down here about this far from the porch to keep water from getting on them.
Uh-huh.
And then if it was rainy weather, we'd take them in.
Yeah.
With dry apples.
How long did it take them to dry?
Oh,
Depending on the weather, I guess.
The weather made a difference.
What?
But now when I started drying my beans, I strung them and broke them.
Uh-huh.
Put them on there's a big old sheer curtain on one of these tables like this on its plastic. And they dry so much better like that, but I put a curtain over them. He said getting in poison ivy.
Eli, get out of the poison ivy, buddy. Run fast.
Because they had just weeded that poison ivy there. But that way they would dry much better because you set them in it. Now when I had the carport, I just leave them set on the carport. And I covered them up with the plastic tablecloth at night so they wouldn't get damp and just take it off, the sun come in on them.
Okay, so you laid them on a shower cloth, a shower curtain,
on
a table.
Like a sheer window curtain, so it'd be thin.
Sheer. Got
so
it.
flies wouldn't get on.
Yeah.
And I'd cover them up like that, and I'd just let them stay on the carport. And at night, I'd cover them up so they wouldn't get dank no more and take it off. And they'd dry in no time like that.
And then what do you do with them after you dry them? Put them in a paper bag or?
I put them in plastic bags, put them in the freezer. But now we didn't used to have that luxury. We put them in gallon jars.
Yeah.
Covered them up.
With a metal lid on them or something that could breathe?
Yeah.
Metal lid?
After they get good and dry, you can do that.
Oh.
But I keep them in the freezer now. I've got some in there right now.
Oh, okay. So you guys, when you were a kid, you guys had huge field of beans, just beans.
Oh, yeah.
And then what about like garden vegetables like tomatoes and cucumbers and?
Everything Mommy could think of, we raised it.
Close to the house or?
As close as we could get it. Now, when we lived over in the holler, our garden, well, it was a sage field when we moved there. It was kind of like going right up to there.
Mm-hmm.
And we raised iceberg head lettuce and parsnips and turnips and Brussels sprouts, cabbage. I mean, we raised all that stuff. And we got our seeds from Atlanta.
Yeah. From where? What was it called?
What did I tell you?
I forget what it was called. You said you visited it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't as impressive as you thought Atlanta was supposed to be.
Because I thought that was the greatest place anybody ever went.
I don't like Atlanta.
But it didn't work out that way.
Yeah.
But that's where she always ordered her seeds from. I don't know where she got.
Catalog of some sort, maybe? Or?
Probably. I don't know. Because then after she started ordering, I know she would get these, what she called her seed books. And they'd have all that stuff in it, But she always ordered them.
What did you guys do then for like fertilizers and stuff like that?
We bought fertilizer, but we cleaned the barns and used that too.
Use the manure and hay.
Because we had
and
horse and cows.
Yeah.
And chicken. Chicken's just the best fertilizer.
And just cleaned out the coops and used it. Just
Well,
spread it by hand or what?
We had a big lot because we had never kept them in coops except when there's a setting.
Mm-hmm.
But
well, how'd you keep them from predators?
You didn't always. Because, possums would get them, foxes.
Boy, when you say a lot, though, what's that look like?
What do you mean? Just a big lot with wire around it.
Oh, just so they couldn't get out of that enclosure.
And at one time, the lot went all the way down. Of course, now that road, nothing looks the same as it used to over there because it went way down to the road that went around to the Lesbethesey field. And we had a cold spring around there. We kept her milk and we'd take it around there as we'd go to the field and bring it back as we come. So it'd stay cold. We had one big spring. We called it our cold spring, and we took our milk like in this big, you've seen these milk cans, and take two of us to carry it around there and put it in that water hole and then take two to bring it back. But boy, it's good and cold when you'd bring it.
You just kept
back.
it in the spring box to
Yeah,
keep
it's
it
just
cold,
down
refrigerate it.
Just down in a big round hole.
Yeah,
But it
with water flowing.
had a cold water right
Under
to it. Had another spring right over from it that we carried water from because our well wouldn't produce enough water over in the holler. We didn't have a well. We just had springs.
Yeah.
But we had springs.
You just carried it with a bucket or what?
Buckets.
Yeah.
And you ought to try to do that on wash day for that many.
For a dozen people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, you put the oldest one in the tub first, and then the baby goes in last.
Oh, no.
You pour the baby out with the wash tub.
No,
or wash.
To save the baby, you put it in first.
Oh, baby goes first.
And the oldest one was big enough to come back if you throw it down.
Okay.
So.
All right. And where were you in the mix?
I was in the middle.
You're in the middle.
I either dodged the bath.
You got kind of not so clean
I
water.
either dodged the bath or they felt sorry for him and didn't dash me out all the water was.
Dash you out. Granny, can I tell how old you are?
You mean how young?
How
I am?
young you are?
Yeah.
How old are you, Granny? If you don't mind saying.
86.
You're 86 years young
86.
and as lively as ever. Feisty.
Probably feistier.
More feistier. 86. What year were you born, Granny?
34.
1934. So you were born right before the Great Depression?
No, right after.
Right after the Great Depression.
29 was the year that the stock market fell.
Okay, so right after the Great Depression.
But we lived through that depression until the World War II.
Okay.
Because that's why everybody had to raise what they eat.
Yeah.
And anything that you couldn't raise was ration. You couldn't learn to get it.
And how'd that work?
I'd say hard for the adults. We didn't know the difference, but we knew they had this. You had so many things to get gas with and so many to get sugar with. And
So they issued
and
each
to get
family?
lard. Yeah, you just got so many of them. I guess it was a month. I don't know how many months it was. But I know to go to work, they had to carpool because they usually worked in Jenkins, Kentucky, and that was a pretty good distance.
How long did it take them to get to work?
I don't know. Because, then they had A models and T models.
A long time.
Had A models and T models. And 3 or 4 would ride together and use one stamps this week, and sometimes they'd have to stay 2 weeks because they couldn't get the gas to come home on.
Uh-huh.
They had to save what they had.
And what did he do for work? Your dad?
Mining.
Coal mining?
Yeah. Up until, years later, then he went in timber business, but mining.
Most people around here did coal mining. Yeah.
Well, that's about all they was. I mean, and then he had to work in West Virginia and he worked in Kentucky, wherever they could find. He worked all day for a bag of flour.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine?
Yeah. How long does a bag of flour last for a dozen people?
Well, at that time, they was probably just about 8 of us. 8 children.
Uh-huh. Only 8?
At that time, because I can remember when he worked all day to get a bag of flour, and he had to get it through the commissary because they gave you script. They didn't give you money. They give you script, and you had to spend it at that commissary. And
the coal mining company's commissary?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Their pockets wrong side out and called it Hoover days or something.
What does that mean?
Herbert Hoover.
Yeah.
People act like it was his fault. It wasn't his fault, but people act like it was.
What was his fault?
Well, the stock market fell,
Oh.
and they called it the Great Depression, and it was.
So they pulled their pockets out, signifying they didn't have any money in
They
them.
didn't have any money. They showed how poor they was.
Herbert Hoover days.
And they called it, they'd call it Hoover days, yeah. But they'd turn their pockets wrong side out to show you they didn't have
anything in them. So what else can you teach us, Granny, about raising our own foods and planning for hard times?
You've heard this.
You've lived through hard times, so.
You've heard this old saying, "I forgot more than you'll ever know." Well,
I think you have.
That goes with it right there.
I think you've forgotten way more than I'll ever know.
Probably not, but you do. You forget.
Yeah.
You really do.
I've had a garden for 40 years, so you've had 40 chances to learn how to raise a garden.
And sometimes you had a good one, sometimes
Which doesn't
you
even
had
sound
a
like
bad
that many. 40 chances is not really that many, right?
No.
It's long
To do it right or to
duration.
do it
I
wrong.
needed at least 52.
Yes.
53 to get on.
That's right, yeah.
But no, oh, I guess the best garden I ever raised was up in the valley. And you know, that was strange. There was a strawberry bed. Walker had a big old strawberry bed there. I guess it was longer from that tree over at the garden. I mean, a big old wide strawberry bed. My garden was above that, and my tomatoes and all was out at the end. His was below it. And my garden done so much better than his, and the rabbits eat his tomato plants a day or two after it. I mean,
Was he jealous?
I don't know. I mean, his cabbage plants that he set out. The rabbits got them about 2 days after he set them out and never touched mine.
Yeah.
Of course, now I had put dusted that powder on mine. I dusted pure flour on some of them.
What's the flour? Flour keeps bugs off? Do they think the bugs think it's 7 dust?
They probably do, and the rabbits probably where that was white.
Yeah.
And I hung like 2 pie plates together so they would flap. You
Yeah.
know. Then I hung a paper bag at the end on a stake so that would rattle. And Walker come up there and all of his cabbage plants gone. Wasn't one of mine touching it. He said, "I cannot believe this." He said, "You didn't have that done, did you?" I said, "I wasn't here either. I didn't see it." And he asked me.
So they were in the same place.
Well,
The only difference was you put up pie
just,
plates and.
he just gave me a part of his garden, you know.
Oh yeah.
But you wouldn't have believed the difference that it made. Shula Milton told me to get Homesteaders tomatoes. He said they don't make a great big tomato, but then it's the best tomato you'll ever get, and they don't grow big and tall. You never have to worry about staking them, and you didn't. And
They wouldn't fall over. They'd
I had
do
to
the
buy
thing.
the whole bunch to get them, and I didn't have room to put the whole bunch, so I put 2 to every hill. Walker said, "Child, did your mommy never tell you don't put 2 tomatoes in a hill?" I said, "You do if you don't have no space to put them. You put 2 to a hill, they'll grow." "Oh, no, they wouldn't." Well, that was the prettiest patch of tomatoes you ever seen. And he brought Elsie's brother Glenn and her sister Catherine and all of them up there to show them my tomatoes. And Glenn counted 20-some tomatoes on one hill there. He could see. He said, "I've never seen nothing like that in my life." I said, "Children, you make do. Mommy always made do. If you didn't have enough room, you double back and planted more.
Make it work.
You double back and planted more in a hill."
Yeah.
I mean, she done that with a lot of stuff. And Walker asked me if I wanted some sweet potato slips, and I said, "Well, yeah, I could use some." It was getting late, like about the 1st of July. And he said, "How many do you want?" And I said, "About a dozen." Well, he laughed. "A dozen sweet potato slips." He said, "I've got 3,000 set out over there." And I said, "I can't tend 3,000. I don't have nowhere to put 3,000. Me and Rhonda was the only one would eat them." And I said, "A dozen will be enough." He brought 13. He just wanted me to have a good measure.
Just
Well,
an extra.
He thought that was so funny. When I was digging them, I waited till, well, it was about to frost. I had cut the top off of them. And then I was digging. He come up there at this hole. "I'm going to help you dig your crop of sweet potatoes." And I had 2 5-gallon buckets sitting there full of sweet potatoes. And I was still digging sweet potatoes, but they grew so deep in the ground. I guess it's where the signs was when I was sitting there. He stood there and looked at him.
Where
He
the
said,
where the signs were?
"Yeah, that makes a difference.
Astrological
That
signs?
makes a difference where they grow deep in the ground or where they come up and get sunburned, you know." And he said, "You know, if I hadn't come up here and seen this myself, I wouldn't have believed it if you'd have told me." I said, "I wasn't going to tell you."
You'd be jealous again.
And he said, "I just can't believe you raised no such sweet potatoes." I canned, I think it was 21 quarts. And then we set a 5-gallon bucket under the house to have to eat out of for the winter, because we had it cinder block around the house. And it was warm under there. And we eat out of that bucket, about a half of a bucket. We eat out of them all winter.
Yeah.
And Walker said he said, "I'm not even going to tell nobody about it because they wouldn't believe me either." I told him, I said, "You have to use it with TLC." And he said, "What's TLC?" I said, "Tender loving care. You set out what you can take care of." I said, "You can't take care of 3,000
No.
things." But now we used to set out that many.
But you had a tribe of
Tribal working in it, yeah.
yeah, a tribe of people working on it.
And Mommy
Kids.
did her own sweet potatoes. Well, Walker did too. And you set out every how many was there. It didn't matter if there was 2,000 or 4,000. You set them all out.
Yeah.
And then you dug them. And
Where'd you keep all of it? All of the harvest? Where'd you?
We dug holes. We buried them in holes.
And what?
Straw, leaves.
So you dug a hole
Shucks.
in the ground.
Yeah, you dig a huge hole deep.
And then you line it with shucks of corn.
You shred that.
Yeah.
So it'd be soft down there so it won't hold water.
Yeah.
In case water gets in it. But you had to dig a ditch around and put a board here above because he always wanted it on a slope so the water wouldn't go
So
out.
you dig a hole on a hill.
Yeah, like going right down through here because he wanted where the water would run off and not.
So
dig into the
on
potato
a
hill.
steep hill like this, you dig a hole.
We buried the apples.
You'd line it with this,
We,
or the shucks off the actual corn,
or straw, hay,
or straw.
something so the water wouldn't stand in it.
and then you put your potatoes or whatever in it.
And sometimes you'd put 4 and 5 bushel in one hole.
So a big hole
Yeah, and then you covered the top of it. You know, I don't.
with more of this. And
No, I don't. No, sometimes it was cloth. And
just lay
don't
a
know if there's
sheet
plastic
across it
what,
or
just
something.
so water wouldn't, when it's freshly dug, water wouldn't go down in it
yeah, well, yeah. If it rains, it's going to get all wet, right?
until it gets settled in. We buried apples and sweet potatoes, Irish potatoes. We buried our cabbage right in the garden. You pull them up, leave the stalk on them, turn them upside down, and bury them in the ground.
And you did that
Even if they freeze
in the fall,
yeah,
before it froze.
it just makes a good crisp cabbage when you do it. Like you just pull up one at a time or two.
And I
at
guess
a
you don't have to
time.
worry about bugs because it's wintertime getting them.
It's wintertime.
What about critters like other critters getting in?
Well, cabbage was something I guess they didn't go after much because we just bury them right in the row where we pulled them up.
Oh, really?
You pulled them up, turned them upside down, and Dennis would take the turning plow and go above them, and that would cover them, leave the stalk sticking out so you could see where it is at. In the wintertime, even though there's froze, sometimes the ground was froze, you could just pull out a fowl there, and that was such a good cabbage.
Oh, really? Okay.
So it made good crisp cabbage. But now we had a underground dairy in both houses that we lived at up there.
Outside the house?
It was all underground except the front.
So you dig into a hillside or something
The dairies was already there when we moved. We had one
with
up
blocks
there.
or what? Concrete blocks or
It was rock.
just rocks?
There was one when we lived over in the valley, but it was there when we moved there, and even dirt covered over the top of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember if the dirt was over the top of the one up there where Mommy's house is now or not. It was out on the bank, what we call the Uri Dairy, the Uri house, the Uri land.
Mm-hmm.
We bought it off of Uri, Daddy bought it off of Uri Davis. And it had that dirt all around it. It was just the front open. That way you could keep your pickle stuff, in them big jars. You fix bleached apples and put them in a big barrel.
What's a bleached apple?
You put sulfur in them, and I don't remember what else you put in them, but they'll bleach out white. Then you had to wash them before you used them. We kept them in a big wooden barrel.
In the dairy,
yeah.
Which is a root cellar, basically dug in a hill.
More or less, but it had shelves there. That's where you kept your canned stuff. It was in them shelves in the back and down one side. And the other you kept such things as that. I think Erie and them even kept potatoes in there, but we didn't. And then after Daddy built that house there, he made him a potato bin under the house that they could put them in back there. So, and then they didn't raise near as many after we was all gone. So
yeah,
they always raised potatoes.
You fill up the dairy with stuff, and that's why you're digging holes. And
so, but back then, I mean, even apples, we buried apples like that.
Really?
Yeah.
And they don't. That's crazy to me that they keep like that.
They kept on it. I don't remember what else we put on them, but you packed the dirt down tight on top. You didn't dig into them until springtime. You had one hole.
So all winter long they sit there. You don't touch them.
You had one hole that maybe just held maybe a 2 bushel of potatoes, and maybe one that held that many apples or turnips. that was what you used out of all winter. The others you kept them airtight. In springtime, you had plenty to last you
until the next
harvest
crop.
come in. Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. I never heard of that. Yeah,
But,
they won't freeze. You keep the dirt off of them by using the shucks and
if
hot
Daddy
straw
had,
or whatever.
if Daddy had any inkling that water may have got in one, you dug into it to see.
And would you say you bit a trench or something around it?
Above it, so if the water run
uphill.
down, yeah, so it would run.
And you dig a trench up the uphill side of it, so any water that's coming down the hill would
go around it instead of going in it.
Well, okay. How deep was that?
Just a trench. Daddy always
like
dug
6 inches or something.
Daddy always dug trenches everywhere. In the road, he kept the road all ditched, he called it.
Yeah.
And he'd carry a hoe after it rained or a mattock. Nobody else ever kept that road up. He'd work it all the way out to the end. Nobody else never did. But now, Daddy and the boys did. I never did, but they did.
Mm-hmm. And they didn't have a tractor or anything like that. They used to use the mules.
Well, we had a mule sometimes. Old Beck.
Old Beck.
Old Beck was our favorite mule. We had one named Jack, one named Fred, one named John. And John was a mean old thing, you know. But old Beck, she would work till she got tired and you couldn't get her to budge. She wouldn't sit down, she wouldn't do nothing but go home.
Day's over, we're done here.
And when she stopped work, you just may as well go home because she wasn't going to do nothing else. And I guess that's where they got stubborn as a mule. Of course, Mommy would say, stubborn as old Beck.
Yeah.
You turn her loose and she went to the house.
That's it.
It didn't matter where you was at. We'd be at Paul Floyd's in the field.
She'd go home.
She'd go back to our house. You know?
Stubborn as a mule.
And she was stubborn. But she was a good work mule till she got tired. That was it. She didn't have to tell you she was tired. She'd just wall them eyes at you and she wasn't going nowhere. So, old John, he was mean. Go to ride him and he'd just kick straight up or he'd take off and then just stop like that.
Try to get you off?
It usually took him off right. Lee fell in a big hole of water like that.
You had 3 mules at one time?
John, Fred, and...
Yeah. John, Fred, and Beck?
And then we had one named Jim.
Jim.
And we had another. It was a female, but I don't remember her name. I believe they called her Jenny.
All people names for the mules. Something about naming an animal a person's name that's funny to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you guys had an apple orchard too, right?
Yeah. I think there's some of them still standing.
Really?
Little warped up things up there.
Yeah.
Because the hillsides took them now.
Mm-hmm.
But some cherry trees up there too. I don't know. We had yellow cherries with the red cherries. The yellow cherries was sweet, but the red ones was sour. I think we had one sweet red, and the others was just sour cherries.
You guys grew everything.
Well, the orchard went with that property when we bought it. At the top of the hill.
That was probably a very big contributing factor of buying that property, I guess, right?
Well, no. Daddy just wanted, as he said, he had renegades, and he needed a place to pasture us all.
Oh, you're busy.
Because you had to clear up a new ground about every year. Daddy'd say, we'll use that as a garden this year, and you all can clear up. He'd show us another place up there.
Just in the woods?
Ground. Yeah.
How'd you guys clear it?
With a mattock and axe.
So you cut the trees down, dig up the roots.
Hatchet and
dig up the roots.
And burn it.
And then burn it.
Yeah.
Burn the brush.
It was a hard way to fix a new ground. Yeah.
They have machines for all that now. It makes it nothing.
But then you had a horse and a plow and a sled and a wagon, and that was about it.
That's a lot of work. Turning woods into farmable land is
and you mowed
a big
your
job.
hay up until the last few years, and Daddy got Ed Mullins come there. He had I guess it's some kind of hay mower, but it wasn't very big, but he could mow hay with whatever it was.
Behind a tractor?
With his horse.
Behind a horse?
Yeah. But before we used them old big mowing size
Like a,
and mowed your hay.
Yeah.
Then we didn't have enough hay forks for all that had to go turn the hay to dry. You had forked sticks. And those smaller ones that couldn't hardly handle a hay rake anyway, we got to use them forked sticks to go turn the hay so it'd get dry.
Mm-hmm.
Then you put a pole in the ground and you stacked your hay up around that, what you couldn't put in the barn.
So you put a pole in the ground.
And
how tall?
Well, then it looked like it must have been 40 foot tall, but I guess it was probably 10 or 12. I don't know. But
and then you just stack your hay all around
You'd haul the hay out there on the sled and take your fork and just keep rolling it around that pole.
All the way up.
But you had to get it so it would get...
It shed the water.
It was a lot bigger at the bottom, and it got smaller up here so it would run off.
Yeah.
Made kind of like a Christmas
And that's
tree.
what you fed the livestock during the wintertime.
Yeah.
The ornery old mules.
What you couldn't put in the barn loft, that's where you put it. You put it on
How'd you put it?
On the stack pole.
If you put it in the barn loft, you didn't bale it or anything. You just piled it in there?
The last years, I think some of it was in those little square bales. But most of the time, you brought this big sled heaped just as high as you could get it on it. And then you took the pitchfork and you picked it up and threw it in the hayloft. That's what we called it, hayloft. And the cows and things in the barn in the winter.
Yeah.
Of a night, we didn't of a day, but of a night you did. But and the crib was right just down below the barn that you put your corn in. And then on rainy days or whatever, you got in that crib and shucked it out and piled it over. It was divided in different bins back there. One you put in there when you gathered it and you brought it and threw it in there. Then on a rainy day, you couldn't get out there and do nothing else. You got in there and you shucked it out and put it over in this bin. Mm-hmm. Then we had a corn sheller, that you grind. It got burned up.
Oh no!
We could shell the corn like that.
Yeah.
But before we got that, you sat there and shelled it till you blistered all your hands.
Just twisted the cob?
No, everybody, you shell it like that, You can't twist it off. But now the corn sheller, you just put it down like you was going to grind sausage. Mm-hmm. You just put it down in that and take it out and throw the cob
When you say shell it, you're talking about taking the...
Off of the cob.
Taking the corn kernels off of the cob.
Off the cob, yeah.
Okay, before it's dried.
Well, no, it's pretty well dried.
So it's dried then?
Yeah, because you put it in the crib and then in the barn, and we had an old house down there. There was heaping corn piled down there, and then we'd go down there and shuck it out, But now that corn sheller saved your hands. Mm-hmm. But your corn come out down here in your bucket, and the cob flew out, Mm-hmm. And yeah, that was much simpler.
Did you do anything with the cobs?
Use them for toilet paper. No. Actually, we burned a lot of them, and actually the cows would just chew and they would eat a cob.
They'd eat the cobs?
Because we saved all the nubbins, we called it. They didn't grow very big. All of that you gathered off to feed your cows. You didn't throw nothing away. Except the cobs. We would throw the cobs away.
Yeah.
But I just added that.
Put it next to the outhouse.
Yeah, we had an outhouse.
Yeah.
But we had Sears Roebuck catalogs too.
That was your toilet paper?
Sears Roebuck catalog toilet paper.
Because then
you got to crinkle it up real good first.
Then you didn't buy toilet paper.
Yeah.
People don't know how much this world has come since then. Mm-hmm. I mean, really, young people have no idea, and I'm sure I don't know how, especially my grandparents was raised.
Yeah.
That's why these young people that tears up everything and trying to get rid of history, they have no idea how this country got
to where it is.
Yeah. It's a pretty easy life.
It's easy life for them, but
compared to
Right
what
now,
you
is what I
and your
mean.
grandparents
and how many died trying to make it that they'd have the right to do what they're doing right now, but that's not a right, that's taking advantage. But
Yeah.
Harm, you've got the best boys that I've ever seen. Said they all behave so well. Daddy said, well, if you let them get by when they're little, you're raising renegades.
Mm-hmm.
He said, how do you think we could handle it if we just turned it loose to them? As many of them as there was, and just Mommy and Daddy, most times just Mommy, because Daddy worked away from home a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there wouldn't have been no way they could have handled. And Mommy's sister's children was so unruly, and they fit till they was overgrown. They couldn't keep a gun in the house because if one got mad, it run for the gun. They couldn't keep a gun. And Lake said to Daddy, he said, I don't understand how you can keep these guns all over the house, and you with this many boys. Daddy said, you teach them to bind.
Teach them right. Yeah.
He said, you can't wait till they're grown and think they're going to mind. They don't.
Yeah.
And they don't.
That's the problem with today's society.
It is. That's exactly.
Spare the rod, spoil the child.
Well, you know, people act like, and the Bible says they may cry, but they won't die from it.
Mm-hmm.
But you may save their soul.
Mm-hmm.
So make a mind. That's what the Bible says.
Yeah.
Because it don't just say spare the rod and spoil the child, even though that's there. But it says you can beat one with the rod and they don't die.
Yeah.
In other words, a switch is what it's underlined down there. And but they may cry, but they won't die from it.
Mm-hmm.
And well, that's true. And to make one mind is, they said that's 11 your son, the way it put it. If you don't make a mind, you don't love your sons.
Yeah.
So, you know. But we use black flag in a little squirt spray
For the crops?
for anything. And we used one of them little dust sprays like this. And it was dragon dust and blue dragon. Copper dragon dust and blue dragon dust.
What was that?
It's a powder to put on you to keep bugs off,
Just some kind of
especially beetles.
insecticide?
Yeah, but you put it in the spray was about this big around, and you pumped it all the time like this.
Mm-hmm.
And for flies or gnats and so on, you put it was just about this big around, and you filled it full like you'd be filling up a lantern with oil, you know, and then you pumped your spray to it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's how you had to even get them out of the house.
Yeah.
Because we always had to go through that. It's all, you work from daylight to dark. You got up like 4 o'clock in the morning, and sometime when Daddy would come home from work and have to come back, you got up at 3, because if he wanted to work in Kentucky or somewhere, he left home about 3:30, because we had to get up at 3 to get breakfast. And then you went to bed not long after dark. You was tired enough to go to bed. You never argued, and you didn't have TV, so you went on to bed.
When it's dark, you go to bed.
When the chickens went to roost, you went to bed.
That's right.
But you didn't go to bed till dark, because you worked up till then and sometime after.
You guys got up at 3 a.m. Because that's when your dad got ready to go to work?
Yeah.
Oh, so everybody just got up at the same time.
And he would leave the house by 4 o'clock, and lots of times had to walk all the way out, you know, because you couldn't bring the car down in there. He'd leave the car up there at the top of the hill. Now, when the weather was good, he could bring it to the top of the hill right there by the house, because our road come in above instead of down where it's at now. And then he could bring the Jeep all the way down the house when it was dry. But, in winter days and it's so cold, he'd have to walk all over. And he has walked all the way out to the main road.
How far is that?
About 3 miles.
Mm-hmm.
And then he'd have to walk back after he put in about 10 or 12 hours of work. I mean,
That's rough.
I mean, it was terribly hard for them, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But then we had to do all the feeding and now there was times that he would help us like in the cornfield or something, or maybe he would help plow or help plant some, but most of the time he was gone. And Dennis done most all the plowing. And I love to use that old corn planter, and when you got your rhythm right, just as fast as you could walk, you could plant that corn. I love that old corn planter. And I mean, you just jumped it in the ground, that's all you did. You didn't have to go back and cover it or nothing, you know.
It planted a seed
and
at a
you
time?
could plant fertilizer the same way. It had a side pocket on it, and you filled that with fertilizer and put your corn in this top container up here, and as you went, your fertilizer fed out the right amount, and your corn dropped out. They'd set it to drop out 3 grains of corn to a hill.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go back and thin it. If it all come up, you had to thin that out.
So you put 3 in a hill, that way if a couple of them didn't make it, one would still survive.
You still had a hill
and then
corn.
if all 3 came up, you'd get rid of 2.
You pull the one when you hoed them.
Yeah. You get rid of 2 of them, or you get rid of
one.
just
No, you pull one
and leave 2.
You'd leave 2 in it.
Okay.
But I mean that was just the way people lived back then. That's what you did.
Mm-hmm.
But I just loved that old corn planter. I can hear that click yet. I don't know what they ever done with. One of them got burned up in the smokehouse, but we had 2.
Mm-hmm.
But one got burned up in the smokehouse.
How did it get burned?
We killed hogs and it turned off warm just about the time we got the meat hung up. And they built a smoker down there to keep flies from going in the smokehouse. And I yet don't know exactly how the fire started that set the wood on fire, because it was sitting up on rocks, the big old container that they had the fire in. But you just build it enough till it smoked. That's
right.
What you kept it smoking.
Maybe it blazed
and
up.
Somehow or other it caught the building on fire. I don't know if it started from the floor.
And it burned up all your meat too.
It burned everything. That was very tough. His mommy said it was tougher telling Daddy about it. He wasn't there.
I bet.
But he said these things happen. Accidents do happen.
Was he pretty? He didn't get mad, or
not over that he didn't. Yeah. Now Daddy was strict.
I mean, he was probably upset, but not.
Yeah, but he didn't act like it because he seen Mommy was so upset, I guess. Yeah. And she'd say, "Children, I hate to tell you, Daddy, that's so bad."
Mm-hmm.
But we had to tell it.
Yeah.
Mining camps down there, he'd never put nothing like that in the house, so he had put them up in top so the children wouldn't even find them. We didn't even know they was down there till they went going off. And that way you couldn't get near the building to get nothing out because
you couldn't save anything because it was going off.
Because Mommy said you don't know which way they may go and you don't know how many's in there. So no, we wouldn't.
Yeah.
We couldn't go near it because you'd hear them go off, but one thing you could do about it.
What do you do with the mining caps?
See, he worked in the mines and lots of times he brought some home, but then when they need them, to take them back, they had to stay dry. Mm-hmm. And he had put them up in the rafters somehow in that smokehouse, so none of us didn't find them.
Yeah. So much for that.
Yeah. So much for that.
Blew your pork to kingdom come.
And we had a gasoline washer in there, because we was lucky to have that gasoline
washer. Like
clothes
washer?
Wringer type. But it run the gasoline.
Really?
Yeah, it burned too. Mm-hmm. We had just got power. No, we didn't have power down in that other house. We lived down behind where that house is now, and part of it was log and part of it was wood house. I mean, just boards, But the first power we had, they put it in the new house before it just was a shell of a house while there's a building. They come through and putting the electricity in, and he just had the electricity put in with drop bulbs until they got the house done.
Mm-hmm.
And then they put the...
How old were you?
I was probably maybe 13, 14, something like that. Anyway, that's the first power we ever had.
Yeah, but that was pretty nice.
Because we used oil lamps and carbide lamps.
Mm-hmm.
That way you had to go to bed when it got dark. You had to save that to get breakfast by next morning.
Right. At 3 a.m., it's still dark, yeah.
We could use Daddy's carbide light, which that was a lot cheaper to use, and he had this big shield on it, and he always kept it as bright as could be. He cleaned it with baking soda. And it had this big shield, but they wore their mining lamps on their cap, And we could set that up on the warming closet to see all over the kitchen, but then we'd set our lamp on the table.
What's a warming closet?
It's just like a little, ours had, it was a coal stove, or wood stove, and it had like about this much, it had doors on it. It was built across, I know you've seen them with just this little flat top across. Mommy's had that. that last one, you know, just had that little flat top. Well, this had this, it was a huge stove. It had this big water tank in at the end. That's where you got your hot water from.
Uh-huh.
And it had this big, like a
Cabinets?
cabinet, only it's metal. Went across there.
Right above the stove.
And it was called a warming closet. You'd put your food up in there and it would stay warm,
Got
you
it.
know, over your stove. And so, I mean, we could set that onion lamp on top of that and that would light the kitchen until you could see around them. Little wood stove to have like when the power went off.
Right.
And the can on. And it wasn't very big and it had four eyes on it. And it, now it had a little tank on it wasn't very big, it was about like that on the side. And you had to keep water in them all the time, if not it would ruin them, you know. But that's where we got our hot water from. We had 3 different size wash tubs. And then we got what they call the bathtub like that, and it's sitting down there on the patio now. That was our later years, our bathtub in Missouri, until after they got a bathroom built. So I locked Ray in Missouri one time. He was taking sheriff, and drove his car out around, brought it back. He wasn't hollering at me. He was hollering, "Mommy, Mom." Mommy didn't know nothing about it. And I knew he wouldn't let me drive it. It was a big Chevrolet. I believe the Impala was it was a big car.
Yeah.
And so he went in Missouri. He worked in the mines, and he went in Missouri to take a bath. I just hooked the lock on the outside till he couldn't get out. And I got in his car, and I took it out in front of the house. We cleaned it right there, right in front of the house, because that used to be where the road went. And we cleaned it there, and then I took it out there at the end and brought it back around and pulled it back in up beside the garage. And he was hollering, "Mom, Mommy." But I knew if I didn't lock that door, I wouldn't get, you know. So I just hooked the lock in it.